Train hard, recover faster, and bring on the gains with Recovery Systems. And your host, Coach Mike on the mic.
Recovery Systems. With me today, we're featuring Netball, in particular Jordon Krogh, who is a customer of ours. Jordon is on the Singapore national team, and it's my pleasure to introduce Jordon to you. G'day, Jordon.
Hi, it's great to be here.
You're not in such great shape at the moment.
No, not at all. I'm carrying a couple of injuries. My nickname in Chinese at the moment is Bai Ka Bai Chu, which means no leg, no arm. That's, I guess, a good picture of sort of my situation at the moment. I had torn my Achilles at the end of last year, and I also had a bone transplant on my wrist done in January of this year for a separate issue that I have there. So I've been rehabbing for the last 6 months or so on both of those.
Sorry to hear, but I would also point out in our experience, some of the best athletes that we work with, including the one that's in the image behind me on my virtual wall, it's All Black Lima Sapawanga. Most of the high performance athletes that we work with have had injuries at some stage in their career that they've had to overcome. So we're hoping that's not the end of the road for you. In fact, oftentimes, and it reminds me of the old Mike Tyson saying, which I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, everyone has a plan until an injury punches them in the face. And I think that
situation right now.
Yeah, exactly. You've been punched in the face and you can't do the thing that you love to do, and that's be fit and play the sport that you love at a high level. But I would, my message is one of hope. Rehab is possible, and I'm sure you'll do the physical work that you're required to do, and I'm sure that will play a role, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that a little later. Before we do, I wondered if we could take a step back and if you could talk about why netball. Why does netball, that's the first thing for you, why was netball the sport? And secondly, I know the injury stats from New Zealand, where I come from, the highest injury rate from any sport, it's not rugby, which is a high participation sport in New Zealand, it's actually netball. So the second part of my question is, why so many injuries in netball? So first question, why netball for you? What was the attraction?
Yeah, good question. So my first living memory in my entire life is actually at a netball court. I was 2 years old at the time, and my mother played at national level. So she was a really good player, and she didn't have a babysitter for me, so she used to take me down to the courts, and I would sit there and watch as a toddler. And she gave me a whistle, I think, for one of my birthdays, or some gift at that stage, and I would sit there and blow my whistle watching the game. And I got so good as a toddler that I actually knew some of the rules, and so when there was like a contact or something that happened, I remember blowing my whistle at that stage. So I kind of grew up around netball, and I've played since I could walk, basically. My middle name is Michael, so people were always like, "Oh, Michael Jordan, you were like sort of born to be a shooter." So yeah, I used to play like all through school. We had like a hoop in the backyard. Physically, I'm a little bit smaller by a natural build, so it was harder for me to be really good at like a really physical sport. And what I really loved about netball was that, you really had to be really fast and agile, and you had to use your brain. So it was sort of skills that I guess maybe more suited me and my physique originally. And then over time, I grew to love the game. To answer the second part of your question, why are there so many injuries in netball? And that's a really interesting stat about New Zealand. I didn't actually know that, but it makes a lot of sense to me because even at the elite level and high performance level, you know, almost everybody that I know that I played with, that I've looked up to, everyone has had a serious injury at some point in their career, and now myself included. And so I think there's a couple of really obvious reasons why that happens in netball. The first is that it's a really dynamic sport. So a lot of, you know, really explosive movements of sprinting. So that's like the first part. So that's how I got injured with my Achilles, sprinting off. The second one is that it's high impact in the sense that you're sprinting, right, and then you land, but because of the rules of netball, you can only take 1 or 2 steps depending on the situation. And because you have to stop with such force, basically the human body, and particularly the human knee and the human ankle, is not really designed to deal with that. So there's actually been a lot of research in the medical community into why such injuries happen in netball, and even within, I guess, like the international sort of federation of netball, people who sort of decide what the rules for netball are, they've actually looked and considered it. Should we change the rules of netball and allow a couple of extra steps because of how many injuries do happen from the playing base, right from, you know, people who play indoor netball with like the nets in the centers, or, you know, Saturday afternoon sports, or even at the elite level like us. Like there's no way from hiding from it, really.
About a year ago, you discovered our product. In fact, you brought the same one as is in the picture behind me, the Blue Max. How did you discover it? What did you hope it would do for you, and what ended up being the reality?
Yeah, so I obviously have a really heavy training load when I'm not injured. You know, 3 times a week, and the active recovery demands are high. Like I work a full-time job as well. Like I need every little 1% that I can get to put back into my performance. And, you know, training on the court or in the gym is really important, and that is known to increase your performance. Like there's lots of research behind that. And what's interesting over the last couple of years is that more research has gone into what about the time outside of, you know, when you're in the gym, when you're in the court, and that's in the recovery stage. And when you're at the elite level, so I was working towards the World Cup, which was supposed to happen this year, but because of the virus has now been postponed. When you get to the elite level, the skill level of most people is pretty similar. So what it comes down to is how focused are you on your training, and where can you get little 1% increases. And so that was the sort of mindset that I had coming into how can I improve my recovery. So one of those ways in which that I felt that I could really, you know, improve how I'm doing recovery was around what am I doing for compression, what am I doing in active rest? And that's how I came across recovery systems. I started using the leg system around July, August last year, in the summer last year. And I think the immediate sort of impact, or the immediate benefit that I noticed was the less intensity of the muscle soreness the next day. So when we would do a lot of running tests or fitness tests, and there was also a case where I played in a weekend tournament, using the recovery systems on my legs dramatically reduced the soreness on the next day. You know, I have compression tights from you name whatever brand they have, and they're good, don't get me wrong, but using the recovery systems on my legs really I feel improved my ability to recover and then get back up the next day and put out, you know, the best performance possible that I can do. Then my injury happened, which really sucked, and so obviously how my training had to happen changed. So it went from, you know, training for competition to training to return to play. So post-surgery, I'm still doing all of the physio, but I use the recovery systems as part of that. So before I do the physio exercises that are really killing me at the moment, I use the recovery systems to warm up and to activate my muscles. And then I also do it again a second time in the evening as part of the recovery, so that the next day I again have less muscle soreness and I can continue on a proper physiotherapy and proper rehab cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned some brilliant points there that I just want to pick up from, because we're relatively new in the sport of netball. There's not you're groundbreaking for us, which I'm really thrilled about, because we think we can have a big impact on the quality of recovery in netball, and also on injury prevention, which you very much highlighted. You're discovering things that folks from a lot of other sports have discovered. Now, we've got 3 Olympic gold medalists who use our product and 2 current world champions, all in different sports. Some of them here in Singapore. I can't mention any names because we don't sponsor them. They actually are customers. So in other words, they put their money where their mouth was and bought the product because they understand what marginal gains look like. And they will win or lose. Just like you said, skill level is very similar, but it could be something that manifests itself in the last 2 minutes of a game where you get half a meter in front of somebody else and now you're in position to take a shot much better than otherwise, as opposed to being half a meter behind and you get blocked. So those little marginal gains manifest themselves a lot in different sports in different ways. So that's great that you identified that. Now, you mentioned using it for a warm up as well, and I would also point out, by the way, that it's an everyday product. So in other words, training makes you worse, recovery makes you better. You only get the gains when your body goes into super compensation. So we know that. My background also has been in coaching for 10 years in endurance sports, cycling, triathlon, and so on. Gains only occur when there's been sufficient rest for the body to respond and compensate. You mentioned another really good point about compression sleeves, which are good, versus active compression, or our products in the category of intermittent compression. So there's a squeeze and release. So the squeeze, to just put it into simple terms, is bad stuff out. The release phase is good stuff coming back to speed up healing, recovery, and ultimately what we're looking for is gains. So gains for you right now is getting back to sport in a way where you've rehabbed properly. Gains backing up day to day means improvements over time that compound, because there are a series of little 1%ers that compound over time. At tournament time, it'll be bouncing back between a weekend of playing, between games, bouncing back so that when it comes down to the crunch, the championship end of the tournament, you're that one step ahead of your opponent, because everything's pretty equal, right? And then there's the rehab side. Now, you're being very smart in using the product as a warm-up. So our results based on muscle oxygen data show that in 10 minutes on the recovery boots, your muscle oxygen will be above what it will take you 30 minutes to get to as a warm-up. Now, you still need to do the biomechanical part, particularly in such a dynamic sport as netball, as you described. You still need to do that biomechanical part, but this is getting your whole vascular system primed, and particularly the blood flow from a rehab point of view, the blood flow into all those breakable parts that you mentioned, Achilles, knees, and so on, and on it goes, because they're not on a major arterial route. So this is pushing a much higher level of blood flow. And to give you an example, most compression socks are 20 mmHg of pressure, and they're static. They're not moving. Whereas our machine, the Blue Max that you have, is 240 mmHg of pressure, and moving from foot to the thigh, then releasing. So you've got the squeeze release on a much higher pressure than a compression garment. That's why it works. It's moving bad stuff out, good stuff in.
Yeah, it's kind of hard how strong that pressure is when it comes in. I mean, the first time you do it, you're like, oh wow, that's tight, but then it feels great. I think the other thing that I really love about the recovery system is sort of like the compartmentalization of it. So I think there's like 4 different sort of compartments of it, right? Each of them that you can sort of set, you can turn on and off. So as part of my rehab, right, obviously my Achilles is not in great shape. So I usually turn off like just that specific spot around my Achilles so that part isn't, targeted because it needs to rest. But then my calf, which I'm doing some of the rehab on for strengthening, which does need the active compression. I love that I'm able to sort of like play around sort of and configure it in a way that really works for me. So
that's fantastic. Yeah. So the feature that you just mentioned is called zone control, and you very cleverly have figured out that what you need to turn off, because the cuff has four compartments, and so that's a very clever thing. This is a great message for netball. I'm so glad that we've got you on as an elite netballer talking about this, because I believe this is a very important message. Now, we have other cuffs as well, and also other features. Now, I want to talk about those briefly. So we have hip and glute cuff as well, because looking at the picture behind me, this is leg cuffs. Of course, we have hip and glute as well, and that would focus on the hamstring area, the glute, and the groin. So the hamstring and the groin are both breakable components for netball, if I'm not mistaken. And then you've got the hip area, which is very important for directional change, which also needs treatment as well. We have other cuffs as well, torso and arms, but probably the lower limbs are the ones that get the heaviest, are under the heaviest load for a sport like netball. Now, the other thing we thought long and hard about as a brand is we thought about a use case for our machine, and the particular machine that you have, I don't know if it was released at the time, but we have the ability now to put 2 people on your machine. We call this a duo system. Now, your machine is backwards compatible. So that feature is backwards compatible. So in other words, what you bought around about a year ago, you can convert to actually have 2 people on at the one time, which is actually a very good business model. Maybe you can sell the other half of the treatment space and monetize that. Or maybe that's a great way to make a friend for somebody that you're rooming with. The reason why we did this, it's actually quite a stupid business idea, because we sell less units. But remember, my background came from coaching, and I always have a passion for making things better for teams, clubs, and also families. We thought about that as a feature, and lots of Singapore NSAs have loved that feature. For example, football, rugby, and others, and other NSAs that we work with, as well as other team sports like Rugby New Zealand, for example. Rugby World Cup, we won the contract last year to supply Rugby World Cup. They love that sort of feature. Didn't make a whole lot of business sense, but to me as a coach and to our customers that we're very focused on, that made perfect sense to us to do it, and everyone voted accordingly to say, yeah, I love that idea.
Yeah, I mean, especially in a team sport, right? After a game, we'll do recovery and warm down all together. We do the dreaded ice bath, where multiple athletes sort of jump in the same bath together. So to me, that makes perfect sense to incorporate that as part of your team, warm down and recovery.
Yeah. Now, just a quick one on ice, and why don't we have ice in our machine? Research and all the medical folks that we work with, and that's everybody from vascular to podiatry to physiotherapy, and then all the elite sports that we work with. Say, for example, New Zealand rugby do not favour ice unless there is trauma. Now, and the same with Singapore rugby are starting to think that way as well. Now, so what's trauma? Trauma is what you had with your Achilles tear. First thing you should be doing is icing that. But just realise that based on our research and the folks that we work with as well as practitioners and elite sport, believe, based on the science, that ice will actually delay healing. First phase of healing is inflammation. And then we step in with the compression to actually speed up the elimination of the inflammation. Inflammation is necessary, by the way, because it's your body's response to start the chain reaction towards gains or improvements. So we're speeding up, compressing that recovery time back, recover faster pathway to gains, faster pathway to improvements. So when we've worked at, say, Singapore Rugby Sevens, the club sevens, the guys are popping into ice after, because they're doing a tournament where they're playing 3 times in a day. And I would say that's highly appropriate. Why? Because they're bringing their core temperature down. Because this is Singapore. It's hot. Yeah. Yeah. And it's necessary to bring your core temperature down. So they're hopping in for a short session, then they're coming and doing their compression. And after we showed them once how to do it, what it does, and after they felt the results, we've got quite a few testimonials on our website from the rugby folks during tournament time of how quickly they bounced back and how amazed they were backing up day after, the next day as well, which is normally when you feel horrible. They were very surprised at how good they actually felt, given that they'd played 3 games the day before. And so day 2 was a different experience in a good way for them. So looking forward, Jordon, has there been any rescheduled dates for the World Champs at this stage?
Not yet. So it was supposed to be October this year in Perth, Australia. So they've just put it on ice for now. And I think once countries sort of start opening their borders and life gets back to normal, we'll get direction on when the tournament date will be rescheduled for. Yeah.
Well, in some ways, it's actually been a good delay for you. My encouragement to you is that there's lots of great players in lots of great sports that have needed to overcome injuries, and we trust that's going to be your experience as well. We're glad that we're part of your protocol and that you're clever enough, smart enough, wise enough to know when and how to use it, what to turn on, what pressure to have it on. That's all goodness, and we're delighted to be part of your recovery weaponry. And we're really delighted to be featuring Netball and delighted to have you on and featuring Netball, because we think we can do great things for netball in not only in Singapore, but in many other countries as well.
Thanks a lot. I really appreciate the support.
No worries. And always good chatting with you. We look forward to catching up in person after when we're allowed to.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Mike.
Okay, over and out for now. Cheers.